Watch this.
Well, happy Friday. Thank you for being here. You made it through the week, and we have a large variety of topics today on the 208, but let's start with the celebration. That's right, because it's Friday. So major congrats to the Idaho court system. They're celebrating a lifetime count of 50,000 appeals. That's right. Since the year 1891, the Idaho Supreme Court has heard 50,000 different appeals. They announced that this week. The first opinion that the Idaho Supreme Court ever issued after statehood came in 1891. So number one here, Goodnight versus Moody, which addressed how much money that state lawmakers should be paid to cover their travel and living expenses during the very first legislative session that they ever had. Now, 2 years later, the Idaho Supreme Court actually began to number the cases, with the first one, City of Lewiston versus Booth, and that was actually an appeal establishing a ditch owner's requirement to repay the city after it repaired a bridge over the ditch. Now, Whitaker versus the Idaho Department of Water Rights is actually an appeal involving a proposed water rights transfer, and that became the 50,000th number appeal filed with the Idaho Supreme Court and the Idaho Court of Appeals. So as a part of the celebration, the Idaho Supreme Court published a celebration and history video. Chief Justice Richard Bevin shared thoughts on the crux of the courts, the rule of law.
The rule of law means we all follow the same laws. No one is above the law, including judges, who apply the law equally, regardless of our own opinions. The courts interpret the laws that others write, and all Idaho courts must follow the Supreme Court's interpretations.
So there you go, some historical documents and a little insight from over the years. And of course, created in 1980, the Idaho Court of Appeals hears cases assigned to it by the Supreme Court, and they help manage the roughly 1,000 appeals that are filed from the trial courts every single year. So 50,000 in the books, 50,000 more to go. Congratulations, Idaho courts. Well, just a couple of minutes ago, the window to request an absentee ballot closed here in the state of Idaho. So that means you have just a couple more opportunities to cast your vote for the candidates of your choosing for the election, and early voting, of course, still available. Next week, Monday, October 31st through Friday, November 4th, any voters residing in Ada County may vote at any of the following locations. So Ada County voters, you can go on Monday to Boise City Hall, the Ada County Elections Office, Meridian City Hall, and Eagle City Hall. And those locations will be open beginning on Monday, and they'll be open through Friday next week, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can also register to vote at any of those locations. Just remember to bring your state photo ID and proof of residency with you so you can prove you're an Idahoan that is eligible to vote. Also in Ada County, during the early voting period, there will be a mobile voting unit stopping at various locations as well. You may have heard about this, food truck voting, some call it. And of course, you can still vote on Election Day, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. around the state of Idaho. And if you have any questions, anything else you need to know, we've got more information for you right now in our voter guide, including voting locations for mobile voting and Election Day voting. You can find that ktvb.com, or you can text the word VOTE, the number on your screen, 208-321-5614, and we'll send you our voter guide directly to your phone. I've seen questions, how quickly will I get it? You'll get it almost instantaneously, so send the word VOTE to 208-321-5614. Well, you've likely seen the headlines this week, historic learning setbacks for United States students because of the coronavirus pandemic. And there was no question, as soon as schools were shut down in the early stages of the pandemic, and then the prolonged with remote hybrid classes, learning progress, well, it really took a hit. But historic setbacks may have hit a little hard. The nation's report card is in, and the first results since 2019, pre-pandemic, are now available. So it's pretty clear we're going to go back to the story of the nation's report card and the historic hit to learning that students have suffered across the country because of COVID. And this is when a big portion of the several school years were either online or hybrid or something in between. So where do we stand? Well, this is one of the metrics, the NAEP as they call it. How is Idaho public education doing as we move out of the COVID pandemic? Big picture-wise, there are new insights on math and reading levels for Idaho 4th and 8th graders as a part of the nation's report card.
It's the same test all the way across the board, and so it's a really good metric so that we can compare state to state to state and also the national average.
Paul Kleinert is Idaho's coordinator for the National Assessment for Education Progress. This go-around, NAEP as it's called, tested 4th and 8th graders on math and reading ability across the country and here in Idaho. The data set creates an easy tool to compare and contrast all 50 states.
They're being tested on a set of standards put together by the National Assessment Governing Board. And so they're not Idaho standards, and they're not standards for any other state, so that it's equal all the way across the board.
The last time the assessment was given was in 2019. So a major takeaway since then.
The metrics show us that something happened between 2019 and 2022, and I think everybody's well aware of that.
Oh yes, that pandemic. Well, learning loss has been a major concern. So what did the NAEP Big Picture results tell us about that topic?
It was down across the board for the United States and for Idaho. What's interesting is that it was down in different areas. For 4th grade, it was down a little bit more in Idaho, and for 8th grade, it was down a little bit more everywhere else.
The NAEP assessment is scored between 0 and 500 on math and reading. And again, 2 grades are tested, 4th and 8th grade, on both topics, math and reading. So let's talk about 4th graders first. In reading, Idaho scored 215 with the national average at 216 for 4th graders. And looking back, the score is lower than 2019 results, where 4th graders were scoring 223 in reading. In 4th grade math, Idaho scored 236, with the national average just below it at 235. If you look back to 2019, Idaho is down from a score of 242 in 19. On to the 8th grade side, Idaho students scored 264 in reading, with the national average at 259. Idaho 8th graders dropped from the 2019 score of 266. In the math assessment, Idaho 8th graders scored 282, with the national average at 273. Idaho 8th graders did drop from 2019 results on an average score of 286. Now, the data was just published this week, so there's a lot to dig into, but here are some early takeaways.
The interesting stories are in 8th grade. They went down less in Idaho than they did in the rest of the nation. And that paints a really good picture about what was happening in the state, what were teachers doing, how were students learning. And because of teachers doing such a great job, 8th graders floated to the top of the curve compared to the rest of the states. There are no states that did better than Idaho significantly in math grade 8. The 8th grade did fantastic. Reading, there were only 2 states that did better than Idaho, and in math, 0 states did better than Idaho.
And at the 4th grade level,
we noticed that in 4th grade math, girls didn't do as well as boys when we dug into the data, and that's something that could be looked at in the future. It seems to be, in general, that girls could be social learners, and because they weren't in person, they weren't working with each other, their peers and their teachers, as much as they were before. That could be what happened, possibly.
Bottom line, there is expected learning loss, but Idaho schools appear to have stayed fairly consistent compared to some other states. A major factor, Idaho educators.
Know that your teachers did such an excellent job. They stuck to it. They were in the classroom. And they were promoting learning the entire time. Students came to school, they learned, and wherever they were, however they learned, remember that teachers did great.
Tuesday night, we heard from candidates for the race for Idaho's Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so here's what they had to say about their plan to address learning loss. We'll hear from Debbie Critchfield and Mr. Terry Gilbert.
Back to basics, focusing on literacy and how we make sure that our kids know how to read. There's been significant monies put towards that, but we're still not seeing the outcomes that we have that we hope to have. Focusing on professional development and ensuring that we have valuable training for our teachers that translate into effective strategies in the classroom.
We can call upon our retired teachers to come back into the schools, work with our students, and we can ask compassionate adults in the community also to come into the schools to work. I don't think the burden should fall only on our teachers. They're overburdened now. They are overworked now. So that is my plan, to bring other people into the school setting.
So that was the debate from Tuesday night this week. The Superintendent of Public Instruction here in Idaho, Terry Gilbert, Debbie Critchfield. They got into a lot of topics, and the full debate and a recap is available right now at ktvb.com. Before we go to break, though, I know one of you made a comment about how many students took NAEP, and I can tell you NAEP tested about 3,500 students statewide from 170 different schools, again, 4th and 8th graders. So this was a pretty comprehensive look around the state, but not every single student in the state did take that NAEP exam. All right, 2:08 rolls on here on your Friday. We're going to step aside, but we'll be back right after this. Spooky season is here. And typically it's all about candy, costumes, and pumpkins. But today, we're looking back at a story oozing with Idaho hauntings. And a little later, you ask the burning questions, we answer said burning questions. And today's question centers around our weather guys, ties, and wardrobe. Oh, we'll show you what you want to see. Plus, keep sending us those questions, comments, and concerns. Just pull out your little cell phone and text the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. Be sure to include your name and hashtag the 208. And don't start your weekend just yet. Oh no, we're going to share some of these texts at the end of the show, so stay tuned. We have that ahead. Just kidding. Halloween is upon us, and it's a time for pumpkin-themed snacks, costumes, and of course, lots of candy. And we showed you Harrison Boulevard is primed and ready for trick-or-treaters, but it wouldn't be Halloween if we didn't bring you some story of hauntings or a hair-raising experience here in Idaho. Now, back in 2012, Brian Holmes trekked up to Idaho City to explore the hallowed and sometimes eerie grounds of their Pioneer Cemetery. In this 208 Redial, he looks at those who used to be alive in Idaho, and some say are still with us.
You may be familiar with the story of Idaho City. Gold was discovered here in 1862. The miners made their way here by the wagon load in 1863. And by 1864, it was the largest city in the Pacific Northwest. Obviously, the story doesn't end there.
Almost as soon as the city began, they knew they needed a place where many stories, if not all, come to an end. So they set aside this 40 acres in the hills above Idaho City.
Just off Buena Vista Drive and sharing space with the pines since 1863 lies the Idaho City Pioneer Cemetery, a place whose population grew almost as quickly as the town itself.
A lot of these people came from back east and they gave up everything to find their gold here. And some of them only lived 2 weeks after getting here.
In fact, of the first 200 graves here, it is said only 28 were dug for people who died of natural causes.
Well, the gold rush took place in 1862. Since then, a lot of people met their demise. Many of them involved a gun.
It seems the abundance of gold led to the absence of law-abiding citizens. Over time, more than 3,000 have been buried here, but only about 300 marked graves remain, thanks to erosion and time. But if you ask the locals, there's more here than meets the eye.
Well, if these people died such gruesome deaths and were murdered, that's bound to stir some interest.
We do have quite a few visitors that come up just to kind of feel there's a definite spirit here.
Eileen Capson is a reporter with the Idaho World newspaper and has experienced some of that spirit with a paranormal group investigating this potter's field.
We walked around the cemetery one night, and it's about midnight. It's a little scary. It's very unusual when you stand around with a bunch of folks and they're trying to communicate with whoever might be here. A voice was heard in a woman's voice. It said, "Elizabeth." when they asked her name.
That's why many would describe a boneyard as creepy or eerie. But those aren't the words Joyce Obland would use.
Peaceful, comfortable.
In her quest for genealogy, Joyce has become a fan of final resting places.
You don't feel threatened by anybody here. You know, these people built our little town.
But even she can share a similar experience to Eileen's.
We were up here with a group, and for some reason, something told me to turn around, and there was a fire. And it had just started, and this was at 11 o'clock at night.
From Grover Jones's oldest marked marble.
Died 1865, 7 years, 7 months, 12 days.
To Elizabeth Zipp's 130-year-old reminder, if they ended up here, there's a chance they found their way back to town.
I believe that that's a possibility. Have I ever run into one face to face? No.
So if you make your way to the Boise Basin, what are the odds you might bump into more than just a bump in the night?
Are you gonna experience something? I don't know.
But it might make a pretty good story.
So 150 years later, the Idaho City Pioneer Cemetery is still the place where Idaho City residents' stories come to an end. Or they could be starting a new chapter. Is it a new beginning, Joyce? I'm confused.
In Idaho City, Brian Holmes, Idaho's News Channel 7.
Yes, time now for the usual fashion segment here on our show. Not really, but wearing a tie here on the 208 tends to get some people fired up, or not wearing a tie. But we've seen a couple of questions and comments over the last couple of years and days about different suits and coats that Brian and Rick wears. And it brings us to our Friday viewer comment, this one from Bill asking, burning question, how many suits and sports coats and ties does Rick Lance have? Do a story on Rick's wardrobe. Well, Here he is.
Well, you know, here you finally got down to the most important question here on the 208.
Finally.
So we can get in on this. Yeah, it
All
really
right,
is.
so what do we got?
You know, first of all, I just got to say that if you walk into a department store and then go into the men's department, you basically see in my closet.
Okay.
I mean, I have a lot of stuff because this is wardrobes that's been developed over nearly 40 years of working here.
Yeah.
And as you know, there were clothing allowances, you know, that were presented at that time. And there were years that I went over on the clothing allowance. I was told by the management, don't do that anymore. And I said, oh yeah, sure. So we went along through the years. But anyway, the thing is that it just keeps on building and building and building. Never really meant to do that. But I could probably say that, fair to say, wow, we probably have somewhere between about 35 to 40 suits.
Wow.
And then we probably have sport jackets, probably 40 to 45 or something like that.
So what about ties?
Ties.
Hundreds of ties?
A couple of hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah?
A couple hundred ties. So when you say a favorite tie,
Yeah.
I would say that I don't really have a favorite. I have too many.
Okay.
But I do, you know, every once in a while, whatever the tie is that I see, I've purchased them for a particular purpose because I thought, well, you know, like this tie, this would go good with certain things. And it's kind of nice to be able to pull into a wardrobe and just say, okay, sometimes you ever do this? You go to put something together and you go, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't have anything that works with this coat. Why did I buy this coat? I've got dozens of things that work with each other, and so I work them together.
So do you plan each morning what you're going to wear, or the night before, or does it just come to you?
I used to, you know, because it was kind of a part of the job
Yeah,
and that
it's
sort
fun.
of thing. But now I just come in and what I do is I just rotate. So I wear what comes up next, you know, and that sort of thing. And out of that, you don't really wear anything out too well. I could rent my neighbor's house and start putting some stuff in there, you know, but it gets to be kind of ridiculous. So anyway, I quit buying things about a year ago.
Do you still get them as gifts, though?
I just quit buying them. No, people don't do that either.
Like if
In
I was
fact,
going to get you a gift, I'd get you a tie.
I know. I know. Well, that would be nice, and I would appreciate it.
Okay.
I have friends who actually say, "Well, you know what? If you're not going to use this again, why don't you let me have it?
Yeah.
Or if you're only wearing it twice a year, why don't you let me have it?" So anyway, it's kind of a ridiculous thing. I'm probably one of those people, but I do understand that there are some who have a lot of suits. I remember we had a meteorologist here one time that they wore nothing but blue suits
Really?
every day. And it wasn't, you'd think, is that the only suit you've got? No, they've got 20 suits. They're just all blue. So I just used all of these ones with variety and stuff because that's what suits me.
There we go.
Actually the best. Any other questions?
Do you wear a suit every day, like outside of work too? Like,
You mean like when I'm mowing the lawn and doing different things
Whatever,
like that?
going
It's
on
just
around.
like the old Green Acres.
I don't think I've
Yeah, I
ever
could do
seen
that.
you outside of. Oh, I've seen you in a KTVB polo shirt.
Yeah, I have. I've worn those, but no, I don't. I don't go crazy with them. It's just when I come to work, that's what I happen to wear.
Yeah.
And if it was on the 208, they tell me pull off the tie, pull off the tie.
All right,
That works out with me.
Tyson, real quick, can we get up a weather graphic real quickly that Rick could talk about? All right, let's see the 7-day forecast. All right, Rick,
let's
what do we
flash
got?
it. So we got mostly sunny skies. Okay, that's going to be for the weekend. It's going to be pretty nice, and it's going to last for this one, and not only through the weekend, but into Monday.
Ooh.
And then the following week, we're going to be seeing a chance of some showers. And you know, Joe, this is the big deal. Get those overcoats out, because on Thursday morning, we could even see some light snow
Oh, no.
down here in the valley. It's just that time. Yeah, there could be the possibility of that toward the end of last week.
Okay, well, forget the suit coat. Get the snow coat.
That's it.
There
Thank
it
you
is.
for the question. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the question.
All right.
That's great.
We'll have Rick back soon on the 208. We're going to step aside. We'll be right
That's
back
something
after this. Thanks for Well, election fans, we are gearing up for the November general in a few weeks. And as a part of that, we're getting in depth with some of the candidates for statewide office. So join us this Sunday morning on Viewpoint, 9 a.m. And we're going to look at part 2 of the race to be Idaho's next Attorney General. Our guest this week, Republican candidate Raul Labrador. We hosted his opponent Tom Arkush last week. Our Doug Petcash asked about major topics, including the handling of social topics and a relationship with the Idaho legislature. We also asked Mr. Labrador about his views on how the office of Attorney General should be run in Idaho. Congressman Labrador shared this thought on his vision for the office if elected.
I want to fill the Attorney General's office with intelligent, conservative, aggressive attorneys that understand that their role is to represent the people of Idaho and not the bureaucracy of Idaho. For 30 years, we've had an Attorney General's office that thinks that their role is to legally justify whatever the bureaucracy wants or whatever the elected officials, especially the statewide elected officials, want. I don't think that's the job of the Attorney General. I think our founding fathers in our state realized that you needed an Attorney General who was a separate individual, who was not appointed by the governor, was not appointed by anybody else, but who was duly elected by the people of Idaho, so he could stand up or she could stand up and defend the rights and the liberties and the freedoms of the people of Idaho.
And you can hear more from Mr. Labrador on the big issues this Sunday morning, 9 o'clock on Viewpoint. If you miss it, it'll be available a little later in the day on Sunday on ktvb.com and the KTVB YouTube page. Again, we've got Tom Arkush from last week already there, so you can catch up on the entire Idaho AG's race right now this weekend. All right, before we go to the weekend, let's take a look at some of your comments. Laura has a review for mobile truck voting. She says, my husband and I went to the mobile voting yesterday at the state campus on Chinden. It was our first time using the mobile voting, and we will definitely do it again in the future. It was very slick how they print your ballot based on your zip code, so you don't have to go to a mobile site in your area. It was so easy and no lines. That's from Laura. So positive review. If you see it in your community, go see it. Tina says, Rick Lance has the best wardrobe, a color maestro. And we got one more comment too. Everyone agrees. Rick is the best dressed man in television. All right. We'll see you next week.